Hi, my name's Mindy Billingham. I'm here to talk with you about the 5 lessons we learned at Bread Financial from supporting large language models. I'm going to start by introducing myself and Bread Financial. We'll talk a little bit about the use case that got this whole thing started, and then we'll shift into those 5 lessons learned. Some things to know about me. I've had a 20 plus year career in data related roles. I've been at Bread Financial for 4 of those years working with Dataiku. I'm currently the product manager of our enterprise data science and analytics tools. I live in Sandusky, Ohio, which was in fact a COVID move. If you're not familiar with Sandusky, you might be familiar with Cedar Point, home of the biggest, best roller coasters. And if you're not familiar with that, well, Sandusky is on the north side of Ohio, sitting right on Sandusky Bay, which opens out to Lake Erie. It is a beautiful place to live. I live there with my wife, Erin, and our 2 dogs, Juniper and Millie. Pictured here, we have Millie. As you can see, she was recently promoted to branch manager. We're very proud. Let's talk a little bit more about Bread Financial. Bread Financial, we are a tech-forward financial services company. We are headquartered in Columbus, Ohio, and have associates all over the world, offices all over the United States. And we do both business to business and business to consumer products. Our products include Bread Pay, which is your buy now, pay later product. We have our Bread Savings account, and of course, what we're mostly known for, which is our branded credit card line. If you go into a store and say you're checking out, and they say, "Would you like to apply for a such and such credit card today to get, I don't know, a 10% discount?" Maybe you say yes, and later take a look at the card that you get on the back. If it says Commoney Bank, that's us. Let's talk about that use case. We had a business need to look through documents, basically our contracts, and questions would come up. They'd need to look through, see, find those answers. And the thing is, we have hundreds of documents, and each document is different, and each one has many pages. So if you have a question like for client XYZ, what is metrics ABC? Well, that metric you can easily find it. Well, I won't say easily, but you can find it. Now, when you have a question that's more complicated, like what clients have this metric set at this value, that gets a lot harder and that's a lot more time consuming. So we turn to Dataiku. We're doing what's called a RAG implementation. If you're not familiar with the term RAG, it means retrieval augmented generation. Instead of retraining a large language model or even fine tuning it, we're just going to pass it all of our documents to give it context so it has the knowledge, and then basically prompt it to say, answer this question based on these documents. This is a very, very classic RAG use case. We chose to use Dataiku because, well, for one, the Answers plugin allows us to create a front end without relying on our IT partners. So it allowed us to go a little bit faster. And it also, we chose to go with self-hosted model instead of like a paid service because of the sensitivity of data. These contracts are very, very sensitive. Let's shift gears and talk about those 5 lessons learned. The first, setting up local GPU and getting it to run effectively is not a simple step. Don't underestimate it. Second, there are a lot of things you can do in your project setup that not only impact the correctness of the response, but also the performance of the application. Third, GPU is expensive, and I'm going to talk about why you need to stay engaged on costs and some of the things that we've done at Bread Financial. Fourth, staying up to date with current versions is obviously a best practice, but we'll talk about why it's especially important when you're working with generative AI. And finally, Rome wasn't built in a day. Make sure you plan accordingly. First thing you need to know about GPU is that it doesn't come up immediately. It's not like that. At Bread Financial, it takes about 10 minutes for our GPU to come up, sometimes 12. And what that means, first of all, it took us some time to figure that out when we were debugging. We build it, we get it to work, everything is fine. Later that afternoon, somebody would try to hit the application, discover our nodes had basically all idled out, and it was bringing them back up, right? So, so that's something to keep in mind when you're working with a GPU application. The second is when you're configuring those nodes. You heard me say they idled out, right? And that is definitely a cost-saving feature. At Bread Financial, what we found is we needed to keep a certain minimum number of nodes going, but we also needed to make sure we set our maximum number of nodes high enough. When we were debugging and testing, we had people hitting it with Prompt Studio. We had a couple different people hitting it with the UI all at the same time, and performance was terrible. Well, that's because our max nodes was too low. So we currently have our max nodes at 10, but I would say you probably need to be at least at 3. Another thing that was interesting for us is we found that some models were working and some weren't. And it led us back to learn about node sizing. Let's say node sizing, but sizing your GPU. When we initially provisioned our GPU, we provisioned what's called an A10, and our first models worked with it. Then other models didn't. And essentially, it's because some models need more resources. They're basically bigger, right? And when we changed that GPU to run on an A100, suddenly everything started working. So a best practice here is use the Hugging Face tool. If you're working with Hugging Face, there's actually a tool out there that will let you plug in some numbers, and it'll basically tell you what kinds of resources you're going to need to run that model. Another thing that was fun for us was working through our code environment. You see, when we started, we had everything in one code environment. This is not recommended. Code environments should be purpose-built. When we had everything in one code environment, it was taking a long time to build. It was, we were rebuilding it. We were having packages conflicting. And what we found is that you really want to separate those out. You want to have your data pipeline code environment. So we call that our OCR environment. We have our front end code environment. And then we have the code environment that runs our Hugging Face models. Another thing you need to think about is when you are working with GPU, ideally think about what you're going to need ahead of time. We ended up cycling through quite a bit, like, oh, we think we need this, oh, we think we need that. And as we were testing, we did find that we're spent quality time adding in new packages and switching them out. One little thing that was a fun debug was the Torch 2 capability wasn't installed by default. You're probably going to need that. So highly recommended. It may seem obvious that the correct project setup is critical, but what's not obvious is when you are working with that project setup, and we're talking about your data pipeline, we're talking about your UX, these things that are not the model itself and not the GPU, what you do will impact not just the correctness, but how quickly your UX responds. And that was a lesson learned too, because separating out what is happening with your compute and what is happening with your project, it's not always easy to debug those things. So some things you want to keep in mind is how your OCR recipe is set up, how your chunk sizes are set up. It's going to make a difference, and it's going to impact that latency. So some things that we had to tweak were around chunking the text, child columns, making sure all of those metadata columns were included in the embedding recipe. Another thing that we had is we accidentally had the answers plugin trying to run as a container. That is not supported. And then finally, make sure the models you're using are supported by Dataiku. Now, just go with me on this. When you're setting up a Hugging Face connection, there are a series of checkboxes where you can choose which models you want to include. That's pretty obvious, but you could also add custom models to it. Sometimes Dataiku will support those models and sometimes it won't. Dataiku is very good about listing in their release notes what models are supported versus not. However, be aware that sometimes a newer flavor of a model will work, sometimes it won't. So just make sure that you're really tracking what you have added into your connection and you're really being thoughtful about testing the different models especially if you're kind of trying to push the limit there. You're going to want to actively manage your costs, of course. GPU is very expensive, but just to kind of put a finer note, I'm going to tell a story I heard about. Someone I know, not at Bread Financial, set up a GPU enabled endpoint, and it was like on a Thursday, took a long weekend, came in Monday morning. It had run all weekend, no timeouts, all the nodes were up, ran 100%. And over that 4-day period, they racked up $8,000 in compute costs with absolutely no business value to show for it. And I think it speaks to how expensive it can be to run your GPU and how important it is to be thoughtful about everything from monitoring and obviously alerts, like if they had set up an alert, that would help them, to some other things you can do to optimize your costs. So obviously, we'll talk about monitoring and alerts first. Or personally, I get monthly reports so that I'm tracking our compute costs. Obviously, that's not going to help in a situation like that, but it does help me track how are we going? What is our cost to date? Have we seen spikes in usage? That said, in the situation I described earlier, you really do need to set up alerts. If you're working in Azure, it's very easy to create a budget and set up alerts on your containers. Another thing you can do, and this is something we've done at Bread Financial, you heard me in the very beginning. I talked about the fact it takes 10 minutes for a node to come up. And for a user, that's not a great experience. So what we've done is we have set up a macro with a scenario that runs at 8 a.m. and it changes the minimum node up to 1. And so what happens is it's going to bring up that node without a user coming in and touching it. And then again, it's going to run at 6 o'clock at night and it changes that minimum node to 0. So basically our GPU is only fully running in the period that our users are going to use the application. After all the nodes time out, basically we won't have any nodes running overnight. That is built in. It's a macro that's built in that's freely available to everyone. So if you haven't taken a look at it, I highly encourage you to do so. It's very helpful. Another thing to consider is using a vendor like a paid service versus self-hosting. And this is another situation where if you have a use case where your usage is going to be sporadic, it may cost you less, even though vendors can be very expensive. It may cost you less because you don't have to keep your GPU up. Do the math, and it is available. Again, if you're on Azure, Azure has they have worksheets and ways to estimate your token use. If you can take a guess on your token use, you can estimate out your costs pretty easily. Well, okay. Somewhat easily. How's that? All right. Let's talk about upgrading regularly. Yes, it is absolutely a best practice, and you should. Now, that said, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our journey. We started working with our GPU when we were on version 12. And what we found is that upgrades or new versions were coming out with all these great features. There was an Answers plugin upgrade, uh, new models with every release, and the code environments. That was, you heard me talking about the pain we had with code environments. If we'd started this on 13, 13 already has those code environments broken out in the screen, in the admin screen where those are built. So we probably wouldn't have made the mistake of having everything in one code environment at first. Individually, each of these things were incrementally helpful for us, but together they were game changing. You'll see on my slide, somebody is running. They're running because we have been running to keep up with Dataiku's releases because they are releasing so many new Gen AI related features. Personally, as the product manager of Dataiku at Bread Financial, I have tasked my team with doing upgrades that can be completed beginning to end within a month with little or no user impact. And my expectation is that we will upgrade at least quarterly, if not twice a quarter. Finally, give yourself time to plan for mistakes and failures. This is a journey. You're going to learn each step of the way. Debugging is going to take you time. So if you can, find the lowest, easiest environment to work in and cycle as quickly as you can. We're a bank. We're heavily regulated. All of our environments are fairly regulated. So there were times that we had to slow down because we had to go through change release processes. If you can work in an environment that is a sandbox or something to cycle through, I would encourage you to do that. Definitely take advantage of your resources. The biggest thing is don't wait too long to reach out for help. Chances are Dataiku support has an answer for you. They have been super helpful for us, and that was definitely something there were a few times where we waited too long to reach out and we wasted time. Every journey begins with a first step. Hopefully you learned something from our experience. And so just a quick reminder, setting up GPU is going to take you time. Recognize your project setup directly impacts your performance and can be difficult to debug. Remember to manage your costs. If you're self-hosted, and if you're not self-hosted, good for you. But if you're self-hosted, be sure to upgrade as frequently as possible. And finally, plan for learning along the way. This presentation wouldn't have happened without our Dataiku champions at Bread Financial. So I want to take a minute and say thank you to Matthew Haycook, Sean Tien, Rob Harris, Lokesh Charla, Alonzo Barrett, Wang Shi Li, Liam Jackson, and Julia Wagner. Thank you very much.